into the Oakland airport, she brings to a triumphant finish her 2,400-mile hop from Hawaii after 18 hours in the air. 10,000 cheer the end of the epical flight as the Lady Lindy slides into a perfect landing with 2 records. The first woman to fly the Pacific and the first person to fly it solo.
This woman wasn't just another pilot. Amelia Earhart was one of the most celebrated figures in early aviation. She became world famous after becoming the first woman to cross the Atlantic by air, and later the first woman to fly it solo. Her achievements made her an icon of courage, modern exploration, and the rising possibilities of flight.
It's much easier to fly the Atlantic Ocean now than it was a few years ago. I expect to be able to do it in my lifetime again.
By 1937, she set her sights on her most ambitious goal yet, to fly around the world along the equator, a route far longer and more difficult than any flown before. But because her aircraft could only carry limited fuel, she needed a stop in the middle of the Pacific. And that is where Howland Island came in. This tiny strip of land was cleared specifically for her. A Coast Guard ship, the Itasca, was positioned nearby. It was supposed to be the lifeline that helped guide her in.
The round-the-world Ladybird and her crew, ready for an adventure that nobody has ever tried before. Amelia Earhart, out to circle the Earth at the latitude of the equator, and that's the Earth's greatest circle.
But on July 2nd, 1937, as they approached the island after nearly 20 hours in the air, everything began to unravel. Earhart and her navigator, Fred Noonan, were flying blind over an ocean that stretched endlessly in every direction. They relied on dead reckoning and celestial navigation, techniques that work well, but leave very little room for error on a flight this long. Stronger than expected headwinds slowed them down, the rising sun made visibility worse, and their radio system began to show serious problems. Messages from the ground went unheard. Signals from the ships never came through clearly. The closer they got, the more desperate their calls sounded. They believed they were near Howland, but couldn't see it. They asked repeatedly for bearings, but the frequency they were using simply couldn't be used for direction finding. No one corrected the mistake, and no one sent the one signal that could have guided her safely in. At 7:42 a.m., Earhart sent the message that would become one of the most haunting in aviation history. "We must be on you but cannot see you. Gas is running low." Minutes later, she tried again, still unable to hear anything from Itasca. The crew on the ship could hear her, loud and clear, but had no way to communicate back. Her final transmission came just after 8 a.m. She reported they were running along a specific line north and south, searching, hoping to spot land before the fuel was gone. After that, silence. Some have suggested conspiracy theories or hidden landings, but the evidence points to something much simpler and far more tragic. She ran out of fuel somewhere over the Pacific and went down before she ever saw Howland Island. The search that followed was the most extensive and expensive in U.S. history at the time. Navy ships, planes, and Coast Guard crews scanned thousands of square miles. They found nothing. No trace of Earhart, Noonan, or the Electra has ever been conclusively recovered. And what makes the story linger, even after nearly a century, is how preventable it seems in hindsight. One corrected frequency, one properly received message, one small change in equipment. Any of these could have guided her safely to Howland. Instead, Amelia Earhart, one of aviation's brightest pioneers, disappeared into one of the most remote places on Earth, leaving behind a legacy of ambition, courage, and a mystery that remains unsolved to this day. And with that, we move from the Pacific skies to the Caribbean Sea, to a case that shows how quickly someone can vanish, even when help is only a hallway away. In 1998, 23-year-old Amy Lynn Bradley boarded a Royal Caribbean cruise ship with her parents and her brother. It was supposed to be a simple family vacation, a chance to relax, explore the Caribbean, and celebrate Amy's recent college graduation. She had just started a new job, was athletic, social, and close with her family. Nothing about her life suggested she had any reason to disappear. But within just a few days at sea, something went terribly wrong. The ship was headed toward Curacao when Amy spent part of the final evening at the ship's dance club with her brother and several members of the ship's band. They returned to their cabin around 3:30 in the morning. Her brother saw her sitting on the balcony, awake but calm. When he went to bed, Amy was still there. Less than an hour later, she was gone. At sunrise, Amy's father woke up and stepped onto the balcony expecting to find her still sitting outside. Instead, her chair was empty. Her shoes were still in the room. Her ID and personal belongings were untouched. There was no sign of a struggle and no indication she had gone for a swim. Her family immediately alerted ship security, but officials were slow to act. Rather than sealing the exits and searching the vessel, the ship continued following its schedule, allowing thousands of passengers to disembark before a full search was conducted. Within hours, any chance of containing the situation was gone. As the investigation unfolded, a disturbing pattern emerged. Multiple witnesses reported seeing Amy after she disappeared, on the ship, on the dock, and even later in Curacao. A taxi driver claimed a young woman matching her description frantically approached his cab early that morning, asking where she could find a phone. Another witness later reported seeing her with two men on a beach. Even members of the ship's crew admitted they had tried persuading her to go to the beach with them the day before she vanished. None of these observations were officially confirmed, but none were disproven either. Years later, new leads surfaced that only deepened the mystery. A U.S. Navy officer swore he saw Amy in a Caribbean brothel, terrified and begging for help before she was quickly taken away.
This clerk
Thank you
with
for
the
having me.
Curacao, I am so bewildered by this report that the clerk with the Curacao Police Department was talking to you and the family and Interpol and prepared to make a deal before ghosting you. But now you've sort of reconnected with him. Is he cooperating now? Is he talking now?
You know, he's not. And when we went down there in November, he was tormenting the family back in 1999. He was having conversations with the Ivor and Ron and the whole family saying she was alive. And this went on for 28 years. So we finally tracked him down, and I went to his house, but he wasn't there. So we waited for him at a meet area, and we talked to him, myself, another investigator, Earl Nance, and my son, Brody. And we gave him the opportunity to tell us what he wants to tell us. And he said, she's alive. I seen her a couple of years ago. And I gave him, I said, look, Herman, I'll give you the tell me the truth. And I asked him 20 times. He said, she's alive. So he continues to say that.
And in 2005, a disturbing photo surfaced online showing a woman who strongly resembled Amy posing on a website connected to human trafficking. The family believed the resemblance was undeniable. Investigators were never able to determine whether the image was authentic. Despite extensive searches, international cooperation, and worldwide media attention, no verified trace of Amy Lynn Bradley has ever been found. Her case remains open to this day, her disappearance still unsolved. And if anything, the mystery has only sharpened with time. This summer, Netflix released a documentary revisiting the case, pulling together witness statements, timelines, and long-overlooked sightings. The renewed exposure brought a surge of public interest, and with it, a wave of new tips, small details, possible sightings, people who, after decades of silence, finally stepped forward with memories they weren't sure mattered at the time. None of these leads have been confirmed, but they've kept the investigation moving, however slowly, toward the possibility of answers. For Amy's family, that possibility is everything. Her brother Brad has said repeatedly that he doesn't believe she died that day. His gut tells him she survived the morning she vanished, that somewhere, somehow, she might still be out there.
It's a mystery that has haunted a Central Virginia family for more than a quarter century. In the spring of 1998, a young woman named Amy Bradley took a Caribbean cruise with her parents and brother. Early one morning, she vanished without a trace. Now, Amy's story is the subject of a new Netflix docuseries. Today, we sit down with her brother, the one who went on that cruise, for a captivating interview about the strange and disorienting days that followed the disappearance, the theories as to what really happened, and why he is convinced that his sister is still out there.
It's a belief he's held for over 25 years, one that has guided the family through every search, every documentary, every late-night phone call from investigators. And for those who have followed her story, Amy's disappearance is a chilling reminder of how quickly a person can vanish, even on a crowded cruise ship, even surrounded by family, even in what should have been one of the safest environments imaginable. It shows how hope and uncertainty can stretch on for decades, living side by side. And all we can hope now, for her parents, for her brother, and for everyone who still waits, is that one day the truth will finally rise to the surface, and the silence around this case will break at last. And while Amy's story unfolds on a crowded cruise ship, this next disappearance begins in the wide open deserts of Central Asia and becomes a mystery that has lasted nearly 70 years. In the spring of 1956, a 24-year-old Swedish woman named Gunnel Gummason set out on a journey across Asia and the Middle East, a trip meant to be a once-in-a-lifetime adventure. She was young, curious, and determined to see the world beyond Sweden's borders. Along the way, she met Peter Wynant, an American traveler with diplomatic family ties, and the two quickly became inseparable. Together, they decided to journey overland back toward Europe, crossing Afghanistan, a remote, unpredictable, and politically delicate region even then. But somewhere in the northern Afghan desert, both of them vanished. And nearly 70 years later, no one can say for certain what happened. Their journey began normally enough. They crossed India, Pakistan, and eventually reached Kabul, sending letters home about their travel plans. But by May, exhaustion and hardship were catching up to them. Witnesses described them as tired, out of money, and physically worn down. Gunnel even walked part of the mountain pass barefoot, injuring her foot along the way. Their last confirmed sightings placed them in the town of Shaibargan, where they stayed at a hotel, bought bread and yogurt, and boarded a truck heading west. And then, nothing. When they failed to reach Tehran, their families raised the alarm. To their shock, Afghan authorities admitted that no investigation had ever been conducted. It took Peter's father personally flying to Afghanistan for the government to launch an official search. Years later, the foreign minister declared the couple had likely been murdered near Shaibargan, but the story was far from that simple, because multiple witnesses claimed to have seen them alive after that supposed date of death. One American pastor was told they boarded another truck, which later became stuck in the sand. According to that account, Peter was shot during an altercation, and Gunnel was taken away by a different group, alive, frightened, and forced into a vehicle heading deeper into tribal territory. A Swedish journalist uncovered an even stranger trail, testimonies describing the couple traveling from village to village for several more days, sleeping in tea houses, resting in truck depots, and eventually reaching a settlement just a few miles from the Soviet border. Some believe they were kidnapped and smuggled into the USSR. But the most chilling lead came years later in 1963. A secret letter arrived at the Swedish Foreign Office, allegedly written by a Pashtun soldier who had converted to Christianity in secret. According to him, Gunnel had not been killed. She had been taken as the captive wife of a wealthy clan chief in the Khazar region and had given birth to a son. The letter claimed it was common knowledge in the area that Peter had been murdered and that Gunnel had been sold and kept guarded. The Swedish government took the information seriously enough to launch an unprecedented rescue mission. Helicopters and 175 soldiers, disguised as road workers, searched villages and nomad camps across the region. They found one blonde woman, but she turned out to be a Soviet citizen who insisted she did not need rescuing. After that, the trail vanished completely. Gunnel's mother died never knowing the truth. She was declared legally dead in 1977. Her father passed away without answers, and to this day, no confirmed trace of either Gunnel or Peter has ever been found. Yet the case refuses to fade. Researchers and journalists continue to revisit it. New fragments of information surface every few years. Rumors from remote regions, forgotten letters, second-hand accounts passed down through families. And each time, the mystery sharpens rather than settles. Because unlike many disappearances, Gunnel's story feels suspended, caught between competing possibilities. A murder in the Afghan desert, a kidnapping into the Soviet Union, or a life lived in captivity far from the world she knew. Almost 7 decades later, the truth is still hidden somewhere in the dust of northern Afghanistan, locked behind silence, tribal loyalty, and time. And until someone uncovers it, the disappearance of Gunnel Gummesen remains one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. And nearly 50 years after Gunnel vanished, a new case would echo the same fear. A young woman taken in broad daylight, and a family left fighting for answers. On the morning of April 3, 2002, 23-year-old Maria de Los Angeles, Marita Veron, stepped out of her home in San Miguel de Tucumán for a simple doctor's appointment. It was supposed to be a regular day. Nothing unusual, nothing dangerous. But somewhere on that short walk, Marita disappeared. Witnesses later recalled seeing a red car pull up, men forcing a young woman inside. Hours later, her running shoes turned up near a rural road, replaced with high heels. At that moment, her family understood. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an abduction. When authorities refused to take the case seriously, her mother, Susana Trimarco, began her own investigation. And what she uncovered was more disturbing than anything she could have imagined. Survivors whispered the same truth. Girls don't just vanish here, they are taken. Determined to find her daughter, Susana went undercover into brothels, posing as a buyer, gathering names, locations, and testimonies. Again and again, different women confirmed that they had seen Marita, moved constantly from province to province, disguised and hidden, always one step ahead of police raids. It became clear that Susana wasn't just chasing criminals. She was fighting a system built on silence, corruption, and protection for the traffickers who ran it. After a decade of pressure and public outrage, 13 suspects went to trial. Over 130 witnesses testified, many describing Marita in detail. But in a shocking outcome, every single defendant was acquitted. The entire country erupted in anger, forcing a retrial and eventual convictions. Yet still, not a single trace of Marita herself was found. Her case remains officially open, unresolved, and painfully alive. And through all the uncertainty, her brother has held on to a quiet, persistent belief that Marita did not die that day, and that somewhere, somehow, the truth has yet to emerge. For her family, and for the thousands who know her story, Marita's disappearance stands as a haunting reminder of how quickly a life can be stolen, and how long hope can survive when answers refuse to come. From Argentina's trafficking networks, we move on to Istanbul, where a solo traveler's dream trip ended in tragedy. She left New York with a camera, a plan, and the belief that Istanbul would be nothing more than the beginning of a new chapter. For 33-year-old Sarai Sierra, a mother of 2, a creative spirit rediscovering her independence, photography had become the one place where she finally felt free. And in January of 2013, she followed that passion across the ocean. Sarai had never traveled outside the United States before, but she'd spent months dreaming of the trip. Her days were filled with balancing motherhood, a struggling marriage, financial stress, and the feeling that her life had grown too small. Photography had changed that. Her work exploded online, her following grew, and her confidence with it. Istanbul, with its layered history and winding streets, felt like the perfect place for a fresh start, even if only for a few weeks. She arrived on January 7th, staying in a modest hostel in a district locals warned was unsafe. But Sarai wanted to stretch her budget and stretch herself. She explored the city alone, wandering through ancient markets, along the Bosphorus, and through narrow back streets, with her camera always around her neck. What her family didn't know was that Sarai hadn't planned to spend this trip entirely alone. Months earlier, she had formed an online friendship with a young Turkish man. They met in person during her stay, and he showed her around the city. Whether it was truly romantic or simply companionship, only two people knew, and one of them wouldn't survive the trip. Sarai also took side trips to Austria and Germany to meet photography followers who offered her places to stay. When she returned to Istanbul on January 19th, she had just 2 days left before she was supposed to fly home. On January 21st, the day of her return flight, she called her family, confirmed her plans, and promised she'd be at the airport. Instead, she went out one last time to capture the city's old walls with her camera and never made it back. When her plane landed in New York without her, panic spread instantly. Her family contacted the hotel, only to learn Sarai had never checked out. Her belongings, her passport, her clothes, everything was still in the room. The search for her began almost immediately. U.S. authorities and Turkish police worked together, combing through CCTV footage and tracking her last movements. Cameras captured Sarai walking through the Sultanahmet district, riding the metro and heading toward the ancient Sarayburnu walls. Then, she vanished from view. Days later, her body was found near the ruins, hidden beneath a discarded blanket. She had been beaten, assaulted, and left in an area frequented by tourists in broad daylight. The discovery ignited a storm of speculation. Rumors about secret relationships, espionage theories, questions about her marriage, and debates about whether she had traveled alone by choice or by necessity. But the truth would come from DNA under her fingernails, from a broken camera, and from a man who had quietly disappeared across the Syrian border. Turkish police eventually identified a suspect, Ziya Taşsala, a homeless man who collected scrap for money. He confessed that he had followed Sarai after spotting her expensive phone and camera. He struck her with a stone, assaulted her, stole her belongings, and then hid the body before fleeing the country. He was captured months later when he tried to sneak back into Turkey. In 2014, he was sentenced to life in prison. But even with a conviction, the story didn't end cleanly. Too many details. The secrecy of her online relationships, the European side trips, her marital struggles, and the way the attack unfolded, left room for rumors and heavy judgment. Sarai's family, meanwhile, focused only on the truth. She was a mother who wanted a few days for herself, a chance to breathe and create, and she crossed paths with someone violent enough to end her life. Today, her case lives on in documentaries, talk shows, and online true crime investigations, not because of scandal, but because of the stark reminder it carries. A woman traveling alone, trusting her instincts, trusting the world, was left vulnerable in a moment when help was just out of reach. And in the end, her story stands as a heartbreaking warning about how quickly beauty can turn into danger, and how a single walk on a familiar path can become the last chapter of someone's life. Now that was all for today, folks. If you enjoyed these horrifying clips, click to see more on the video on screen.